So the next thing we have up is actually, I'm going to be changing seats in a moment. We're going to have a panel discussion. It's going to be led by none other than David Hogue, who is the UX design lead at Google and has been so since 2013. I've actually not really heard of anybody staying at a tech company for that long, besides maybe Stacey. I think she may be actually the only other person I know that has actually had the same lower third as long, I think pretty much as long as I've known her. But Dave, we've been on a couple of discussions before, and it's always been a lot of fun. So now I think I'm stepping in for Chris Coyer. So if I'm talking about things that are personally relevant, it's probably CSS and banjos. I can't really fake that very much, but I'll try. But I'm going to turn this over to you and let us know what we're going to be talking about. I'm super excited to have you back at Web Unleashed, and even more excited to be on a panel discussion with you again. Thanks, Dave. I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Nice to see everyone again today. Hello, well, everyone. Welcome to FITC Web Unleashed. And as usual, we've invited a very talented group of design and development leaders. They've collectively contributed significantly to the way we think about design and build digital products and services. After our conversation today, we'll have a few minutes for questions from the audience, so please do add them to the Q&A. Today, we're going to be talking about creativity and innovation, taking a deeper look at how we think about what makes a product, service, or a feature original and better, and how the tools we use can both influence our solutions and the way we think about what is a meaningful, useful, and valuable improvement for the people who use our products. All of our panelists today have interesting perspectives and very deep experience with how we create and craft our products. So please, let's welcome. First, we have Tatiana Mack, joining us, I believe, from Portland, Oregon. She works directly with organizations to help them build clear and coherent products and design systems. She's a strong advocate for designing and developing for accessibility, performance, and inclusion to improve our digital and our physical society. She's very ethically minded. You'll be able to tell right away. She thinks technologists can and should dismantle exclusionary systems in favor of community-focused, inclusive ones. Tatiana is focused on building a dictionary called Self-Defined, which seeks to provide more inclusive, holistic, and fluid definitions to reflect the diverse perspectives of the modern world. Next up, we've got Stacey Mulcahy, and I believe today she's joining us from Seattle. She's a senior program manager at The Garage, an internal resource at Microsoft for developing community. In a previous life, she was a lead developer working with a variety of technologies at Big Spaceship, a digital agency based out of Brooklyn. She's also a technical editor and instructor. Teaching is something dear to my heart as well, and enjoys sharing her love for her work in interactive development. She's going to be charming us today with her complete lack of a verbal filter and extreme candor. And finally, we come back to Mr. Jason Pamental, MC panelist. He's joining us from Rhode Island today. He's a former full-time bicycle racer with more than 25 years in the web industry, a strategist, a technologist, a member of the W3C Web Font Working Group, author of Responsive Typography from O'Reilly, and is currently a principal designer on the design systems team at Chewy, where I think he spends much of his time designing dog biscuits. Since the introduction of variable fonts 6 years ago, he's been focused on researching, writing, and working with them to set type better on digital platforms in more modern and performant ways. You might also recognize him from other events, past FIT events, an event apart, and other conferences. Now that we've met our experts, let's start talking about creativity and innovation. And I actually want to start with a question that I'm just going to toss out to everyone, and we can each take a moment and a turn here. Just what is creativity? So the dictionary succinctly says it is the use of imagination to generate original ideas. But what does creativity mean to you, Tatiana?
I think that my favorite definition of creativity is working within restraint, that I think we often think of being unrestrained as the core of creativity, but I actually think it's the opposite, that we find the most ingenuity in having some sort of restraints. At least I find that, especially being neurodivergent, like if I'm given too many options, I'm actually less creative. So that's my favorite definition.
Right. It's like finding a solution when everything says it's not going to work. That you're bounded by these constraints and you still find a way to make it work. All right. I like that. Stacey, what for you, what does creativity mean?
I would agree with what's been said. For me, creativity is problem solving. And problem solve, everyone can be creative because everyone can problem solve, whatever that may mean. And so creativity is often really segmented to a certain individual or a certain type, which creates silos, I would say. And so when you just kind of break it down as you have restraints or constraints for what you're trying to solve for, and you have to think of different solutions for that, I usually just bring it down to problem solving. And that's how I see it, which I think some people would probably disagree with. But that's where I feel like I see a lot of the innovation and ingenuity coming out, because you're trying to work within something you can't control necessarily.
Right. I really like how you included ingenuity in that description. And I totally agree with you about problem solving, but I like ingenuity as problem solving in the face of constraints, right? It's like, I'm going to make it work regardless of what the systems and everything are saying should not happen. All right. And Jason, what for you, what is creativity?
Well, not to just parrot what everybody else is saying, but to kind of build on that, I think the way I think about it is it's like the art of looking sideways. I think that is something that is a muscle that you can always really kind of exercise, is how to find those connections between things that might not be obvious when you're looking directly at a problem. So, whatever the constraint is, how do you work around it? Who did you talk to yesterday that mentioned something that is like somewhat related, and you make those random connections? And I think it's honestly one of the reasons I love cycling is I can let my brain do that. And it's when you can kind of like relax your focus a little bit, and then your brain does the work, and it makes those weird little connections, and then I forget about them by the time I get home. But still, that's what I love about working as a designer. Again, that just having that focus again in my career more full time in the last year is because I get to practice that all the time.
Right. I like that, connecting, and oftentimes I think the things that we find a way to connect that surprise people. I didn't know those two things went together. I didn't know those two things could work together. I didn't know those two things could be coordinated, and it brings you to something new. So we have this idea of there are constraints, there is problem solving and ingenuity, and there is making connections. Three really, really important facets to creativity. I'm just very briefly from my perspective, as a psychologist and a former researcher, of course, I had to go to the research and say, what do the social scientists say about what is creativity? And they talk about it from many different perspectives. I think two of the things that really jumped out at me is that we can think about creativity in terms of it may be an exercise in exploration where we are looking for something new and unknown. It may be an exercise in transformation where we are changing something that we are already familiar with into something new. Or it could be an exercise in combination, which is, Jason, what you were just talking about, the connection. We bring things together that we didn't previously think to put together. Paul Torrance, who's a psychologist who has studied creativity extensively, has identified what he says are 4 elements to creativity and creative people. And he says, when we think about people who exhibit creativity, they often are described as having fluency, the ability to generate lots of ideas, or flexibility, the ability to generate a wide range of ideas, not just one solution or two similar solutions, but multiple very different solutions. That we think of creativity as having originality, unique and new ideas. And another skill that comes along with this, and one I'd like to talk to y'all about, is the ability to elaborate on those ideas. Not to just generate the idea, but to be able to think deeply about it and specify the details of it and to make it fit with the other things around it. And so that elaboration concept. Stacey, I want to come back to you for a moment and talk a little bit more about the problem-solving aspect of this, because I think a lot of people don't make the connection between creativity and problem-solving. What do you think that connection is? Why did problem-solving jump out at you as an important facet of creativity?
We, in my job day to day, I work with people doing grassroots renovation. So, you see a lot of things that come across. People have similar ideas, like similar pathways, but a little bit of variance, for example, is a common one. People who apply something completely different in one realm. So we're talking about connections. And for me, that's like almost an unusual application of a technology idea, whatever. And so, so when I see those things popping up and those trends and how large bodies of people come together and think about things, ideate, move, ideas forward and all that kind of stuff, you start to see these little trends. And so, at the end of the day, what it's coming down to for me when it comes to the problem solving aspect is that I'm typically working with engineers, right? And engineers typically aren't seen as creative. And the minute that we say, hey, we got to be creative, I'm gonna, make a blanket statement here, which I'll get, crucified for, I know. But I think the minute we do that, it kind of almost puts up a little bit of a barrier and vulnerability. And so calling it problem solving, regardless of what the output might be, if it feels like something everyone does every single day, rather than making creativity a special skill, a special nugget, not approachable, can't be learned, can't be taught, any of those things. And so, yeah, I always kind of throw it into that realm a little bit because at the end of the day, it's almost more inclusive for people who don't identify as being creative. Taking away the blue sky, which I'm sure we all love, like blue sky thinking with no restraints and no nothing and no direction. And so, yeah, that's kind of the connection for me for problem solving is it's actually, I feel it brings more people along and invites more people in, which those various perspectives are going to result in some really, really interesting, solutions, ideas, propositions that move forward.
Right. And there were a lot of really interesting things you said there. Two things that really jump out. One of them is that creativity as a concept has been elevated. It's been placed on a pedestal that it is somehow a special, unteachable skill that you have it or you don't. And almost that creativity belongs to artists. But your framing of this as problem solving, of finding a way to make things work, is in fact an exceptionally creative activity. The other part of this, and Tatiana, I think you'll probably have some thoughts on this as well, is you said that bringing it to the people to collaborate, bringing it to groups and engaging the group and getting all of their different perspectives. And Tatiana, you do a lot of work with inclusivity. And how do you think creativity is influenced by the people that we collaborate with? What's the connection between the diversity of the team of collaborators and that team's ability to generate ideas?
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to make a note of before I respond to the question directly is that I think that we often think of creativity at specific phases, which is why engineers are historically excluded from conversations where we are being creative. So I think that's aspect number one, is that we typically bring engineers in what I would consider too late in the process, because we're seen as the executors of the plan. We're not seen necessarily as collaborators of the plan. And so then we're placed into this role of a reactionary, like, wet blanket response, where we have to break the news of, well, you actually can't do that, and here's why, instead of the proactive rule where the idea is still fresh and we can find ways to execute the idea while it hasn't been so articulated and defined by designers and strategists and program managers. So I think that's aspect number one, is that creativity is phased, and because of the inherent and sometimes waterfall aspect of our work, certain people are excluded. In terms of what the makeup of a team brings to creativity, I think it's bringing in, and I have a lot of talks about this, but bringing in perspectives that aren't necessarily reflective in the room. And a tactical example I love to provide is that if you have lived if you are a child of the internet and you either remember a world before the internet or you don't, and you live in a world where you operate on high-speed Wi-Fi most of the time, you don't have a lot of understanding around people who operate on a data model, where their data is entirely purchased. Wi-Fi in public spaces isn't common. And so a very tactical video, like aspect of loading a video unnecessarily, that's a lot of data and therefore money that you're taxing onto people. You would never consider that if you only operate in Wi-Fi. And so that very isolated example, much of the global market does operate on that data first model, but in a very Western focused society, that's something we often ignore in the way that we strategize our performance budgets, as one example. So
right. Yeah.
I think those sorts of perspectives are things we don't know what we don't know. And I love Jason's aspect of like looking sideways, because usually it's at the periphery that we find people that are able to offer those perspectives and able to give us insight that our core groups are often lacking.
Right. Jason, that sounds like an invitation. Yeah.
I can't wait for the book to drop, Jason Pamental, The Art of Looking Sideways. It's going to be a beautifully typeset book. I already know it.
Oh, gosh. Well, and if they improve the fragmentation, it'll all be web-based too. So I'm just going to tie it right back to Rachel's talk earlier on. I think there's so many things about what you were just saying, Tatiana. I think the creativity really needs to happen at every phase. I mean, even from that most basic one of how are people experiencing this product, this website, this whatever in the first place, is such it is such a loaded thing that has so many assumptions baked into it. And I think, I'm sure I'm not getting the attribution right, but I think it was Brad Frost was the first person that I heard say something along the lines of performance is the first aspect of design that a user will encounter. Because whether or not it shows up in the first place in a usable way is an aspect of design, and it is something that really is tied to the way somebody accesses that experience, and sort of pulling apart what is the mode of access, what's the device they're on, what's the speed, all of those things sometimes are together in one expected way, and then many times they're not, and so like that that idea of problem solving, not being creative but solving some problems, being able to do that at all phases and question all of the different assumptions that we've been making, I think is the biggest challenge. I mean, I work at like you do at a big company on a big product, and I hear so many assumptions being thrown around all day long, every day, even with the things that are held up to be objective metrics of performance of other things. It's not what I experience in the real world. And I'm on a fast device in a pretty well-developed area with a lot of 5G coverage, and I don't get that same kind of experience. So I don't know what those metrics are trying to say, but we could use some better problem solving. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. So thank you all for the thoughts on this, and back to one of the things, Tatiana, you commented this on the beginning in response to Stacey's comment about getting people involved early and being cross-functional and early involvement. And I agree. I think it's absolutely essential for all of our team members to be involved in that sort of ideation and exploration process. Jason, your comment just now about performance, understanding how a product is going to be built and delivered is a critical component of the experience of that product. And Tatiana, you said sometimes we have to be the bearers of bad news, where we say, yeah, we can't actually do that, or there's not a way for us to build this, right? I like, if we don't have the engineers in the discussion and we don't frame our conversation as this is what we are trying to achieve, and here are some ideas for how we might achieve that, and then getting that perspective of how we would actually create it and deliver it is essential to making that choice, which is the optimal solution here. It is, as we spoke earlier, there's a whole bunch of constraints, and we have to optimize within those constraints to find the best solution. And that's where maybe the originality, the exploration component of creativity starts to come in. It's like, well, how can we do this? I mean, I'm sure all of you have great examples of where an engineer on the team said, yeah, that would be really hard to build, but if we did it this other way instead, we could also have it do these other things. And those other things might be features or services that a designer had not considered, but turn out to be valuable to the product. And so it's that other perspective of how it is crafted, how it is built, not just how it is designed, that may change what our choices are. Jason, I've got
yeah,
please go ahead.
I wanted to interrupt with something, which is that I think a huge aspect of this is the psychological safety of a team and being able to feel the mutual respect of our roles in order to stretch into spaces that aren't necessarily our swim lanes. And I think this is a huge aspect of corporate culture that's really difficult to navigate, where as an engineer, you don't want to disrespect a designer coming into a space, right? Questioning a lot of the reasoning and motivation behind things. If you don't have that respect, that can often come across as being combative, when if we have psychological safety, if we have respect, anyone should feel both the responsibility as well as the collective ownership in order to question the way something is conceived, the way something is built, the way something is monitored. And I think that's just something I think is really difficult. Certainly not something I'm perfect at in my own life, but something I'm always striving to be better at is how do we invite people into processes and make them feel more collective ownership and responsibility and less territorial. So those performance conversations, I think making designers feel a sense of responsibility for performance. It's not solely on the engineers to make a performant product. You can only engineer yourself out of an unperformant product so far, is one way that I've tried to do that. But I'd be curious, like, what you all think and how you've encountered or faced that problem in the past.
Yeah, Stacey, you were nodding very vigorously there a moment ago.
We talk a lot about this. I mean, we're big corp and a lot of legacy, right? A lot of history. We all know it. And when we talk about that psychologically safe space to have an idea. It's very vulnerable to put out an idea. Like it really is. You either have a lot of confidence and don't care, or you're putting it out there and you have this moment, is it going to land? And so when people put out ideas, it's one of the most vulnerable things that they can do, like literally, in my opinion, because you are opening yourself up. The default reaction we all have right now is judgment. And if you take a kind of page out of Ted Lasso's book of curiosity, not judgment, people say, oh, that's a great idea. Not let me ask questions about it. It's a judgment. The immediate response is almost always a judgment. And so, I agree with everything was said. It's like one of the key things, even about being, enabling people to explore, enabling them to fail, and enabling them to have those discussions, is that if you don't have the setup for it so that people feel comfortable to do so, you're just going to perpetuate the same kind of things that you see again and again. And so, enabling people to feel like they can put stuff out there and not be immediately judged for it, and it's met by curiosity. Let's explore that, no matter how good or bad of an idea you want to prescribe to it, is super important. And sometimes even when we engage with students, we don't let them say their ideas. We make them put their ideas out there in emojis, because it's up to you to interpret what that idea is, and everyone will bring a different perspective to what they're seeing, interpreting, and reading there, and it creates a conversation rather than a judgment.
Right. Yeah. Jason, you're leaning in.
Yeah. What I wanted to say is that what is so interesting to me, I think all of us have lived very much the intersection of design and technology, on one leaning in one direction or the other. But I think that's actually a pretty strong common thread amongst all of our careers. And it can just as easily happen the other way around. And that's something that, so part of my role at Chewy is to help all of the other designers figure out how to navigate those conversations as well. Because in a company that may have a very large proportion of engineers to the number of designers, I mean, that's something that many of us have encountered in one way or another. It can be just as daunting to speak up in a situation like that as well. And when you're looking at this sort of triangle of product management, engineering, and design, coming into that and needing to speak up about something from whichever direction you enter that conversation, and say, you know what, I think there's an aspect of this that we're not considering, takes courage, and it takes support. And I think that it's something that it's really important for anybody who is a page or two ahead to remember, that not everybody has gone through that. Not everybody has the same conversation. Thinking about that language. I was just seeing the yes and from Elizabeth in the chat, and I know that something around the way that we can encourage language to be used to encourage participation in that safe and open and respectful way. I love reframing creativity as problem solving, like little things like that, shifting away from combative language. I don't want to ever ask somebody to defend an idea. I want to talk about it. I'd love to understand it, but I don't want to ask you to defend it, because then you're already setting up an adversarial conversation. And I think those things are really powerful. And so that setting up that safer space I think language is a huge component of that. And I think I'm completely losing the thread of where I was going with that. But I love the where we want to get to is a way where everybody can participate, whether you're a young designer, an experienced engineer, the other way around, somebody who is managing the product. It doesn't really matter. Everybody should be able to have a say, because all of us are representing the perspectives of the people that use this thing, and we need that, because way too often it is so over-indexed on people that look like me, and that's wrong. I have an expensive phone. I live with lots of great Wi-Fi and all that, and that's just it's an endemic problem in the industry, and there's no way that we break that down and make inclusive products unless we can get away.
Right.
I
So
think that
there are a lot of ideas. Yeah, Tatiana.
Oh, sorry. I feel like I keep being that person. But I think one aspect of this idea thing that I notice is that we tend to, I think, Stacey, you mentioned it earlier, we tend to immediately jump to judgment. And it's this like, I don't know, pathological response where we hear something and we want to immediately decide if we agree or disagree before recognizing whether or not we understand or don't understand. And that's something that I know individually. I've gotten that feedback on a performance review like 10 years ago, and I will never forget it. It's like, listen to understand rather than to respond. And I think when people are sharing ideas, what makes it difficult to be vulnerable often is they're expecting that judgment. So often ideas are presented in a way that are for awaiting judgment rather than awaiting curiosity of how that idea could be teased apart more. That we're only often sharing ideas that we feel fairly baked in, which only affirms a lot of biases and confirmation biases and things that we think will sell, right? Rather than giving an idea that might be rough around the edges, but might actually lead to something great if we were more inviting that yes and principle. I think that's something I see a lot.
Right. I agree. I think there are many designers. I know I encounter this especially with more junior designers, people who are new to the field, want to make sure that they feel like they've thoroughly explored their concept before they share it with someone else. And they, as you said, Jason, they're in a defensive mode, right? I have to go in and prove that this is a good idea, not just open it up, offer it to an open space and say, what do you think? But to do the work. I've thought about this and I've thought about how it could work and I've thought about how it might fit in. And when someone asks me a question, I'm going to have the answer to it. And being in that situation of I may not have the answer or, oh no, I don't have the answer, causes us to restrain ourselves in some cases. I want to try and summarize some of the things that we've been talking about here, because we've got two perspectives that we've been taking in this conversation. We've been talking about the individual experience, but we've also been talking about the collective group, those who are collaborating. What we're striving to do in order to facilitate, to foster creativity, is to create environments which are open, which are inclusive, and which are safe for any individual. But in order to do that, we have collective responsibility for the group, for the idea, for the product. We are all responsible for these things. But we also have to respect and trust each other. And I think there are some subtle distinctions that you were starting to get into there. I trust the other people to represent their expertise, their experience, and their perspective, and that what they say is true. And I accept that. And if they give feedback from their perspective, that is important. And so that respect and trust, they're like a two-way street, things that we share and how we share them with each other. So when we feel collectively responsible, when we are collectively trusting, and when we are collectively respectful, then we get these open, inclusive, and safe spaces for individuals. Is that a good summary? I know we got off topic, but we're trying to figure out how do we set up a situation for creativity, right? And we're trying to create the environment that supports creativity.
Well, I think that also would bring it right back to where the topic was headed, which is if you don't have that, you're not creating an opportunity for any significant kind of innovation, whatever kind, because without everybody being able to bring themselves to the conversation and their perspectives, then you do get just more of the same, or maybe at best that incremental, like tiny little optimizations, but nothing.
Right.
You're not as likely to find something really transformative.
Right. Right. So let's shift our lens a little bit. Let's shift our frame, right, and take a look at this. What causes us to limit or restrain our creativity? And Stacey, you hinted at this just a few minutes ago when you were talking about at large organizations, we sometimes repeat the mistakes we've made in the past, and sometimes we have organizations create processes that people feel that they are limited to or must adhere to, and that maybe those processes are not facilitating some of the way you're working. Like you mentioned using emojis to present a concept, right? If the process dictates that you bring visual designs and a PRD and something like that, and that any other presentation is not official, is not what we do, it's not how we work here, then that may be a constraint for people. And Jason, I think also, Tatiana, you were talking about engineering constraints, and Jason, you were talking about performance. Let's talk about the tools that we use in order to create products, and how might those tools be constraints on creativity? How might we be limiting ourselves based on how we represent our ideas, create our ideas, generate ideas, create our products? And I think there are, if we think from like a development perspective, there are so many frameworks and libraries out there that people can quickly adopt, plug components together, and get something new right away, just by piecing together things that already exist. Jason, you work on design systems where I don't have to think about what a button is. I just go get the button, right? And I don't have to think about what's on brand for this drop-down selector. I just go get the drop-down selector. And so if I need a new form to sign up for the latest, greatest dog biscuit, what's the creativity there? Pluck, 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 pluck. Here's all the form bits, and ta-da! It's live on the site. And Tatiana, from that engineering perspective of, it's really hard to build it that way. Is it hard to build it because of the tools or because of the components that are available? Are we limiting ourselves? Are we limiting our creativity by becoming very, very reliant on existing frameworks, libraries, and systems?
I'll just chime in and say I think that all of this is just a very clear message that we're just trying to do too much. And I think that we have over-indexed and made ourselves so efficient at building things very quickly and with a great sense of velocity, but with a very narrow definition of velocity. I think we overvalue short-term velocity over long-term velocity. So what I mean by that is that we latch onto, to your point, frameworks and systems, and we use it as a way to stop thinking. And I think in your example, I kind of giggled because I actually think that using a design system and implementing it takes a great deal of thought. Like when I am, executing or working within a design system, there's a lot of thought of should I be using a drop down for this? Yes, I don't have to necessarily think about the UI details because those have been very clearly articulated, but what it allows me to focus on is maybe the aspect that requires a bit more thought for this use case. Is the drop down the best option for this? Should I be using, a radio select instead? Should this be a default setting? So I think design systems for me don't allow me to stop thinking. They allow me to redirect my thinking to some of the questions that would otherwise get muddled by some of the questions that are answered by the design system, which are the consistency, the brand. So that's my hot take, I guess, is we're going too fast.
Oh, I 1,000,000% agree with you, and I think that what we often miss with design systems is that they shouldn't be the pinnacle. They should be a plateau. They should be something that allows you to spend your time on more important questions. So, like to Tatiana's point, the fundamental question of what is the right control to help someone make a decision. When I say a control, whether it's the drop down or radio button selection, what will help that person evaluate the available information, make a good selection with the least amount of sort of cognitive load for them? Well, is it, and so lots of things go into that question, but what that drop down looks like doesn't have to be one of them. And I think, if you work on a design system and you work with a large product team, then you inevitably get those kinds of questions like, well, how am I supposed to be creative if I can't, do this? And that's a whole, you got some constraints to work with. Like, that's good. Like that should let you think about way more important things. And every time we tackle some of these challenges in our design system on our team, I think we uncover new areas that we could explore, parts of visual language that we've never had a chance to develop that would help further that experience and make it more layered and interesting and innovative. And I think that's where we get it most wrong. And I think a lot of companies fall into this trap of we need to make all these components. Everything has to be like consistency. Well, to a point. And then it's the things that are different that actually make it exciting. And so, you have to have the time to think that through. And that's, I think, the way we get that time is to be able to move faster on some things so that we can spend more time on what will make it really special. No one wants to just make, maybe not many people. I don't want to just make another Amazon. That's not interesting to me at all. But making something that is really engaging. I mean, hey, if I get to spend more time on dog biscuits, awesome. But because that's going to make a more interesting experience for the pet owners.
Stacey, your thoughts?
I don't think I have much more to add. When I think of frameworks and systems and design systems, whether it's developer frameworks or whether it's a design system that you're using, again, to the point, I think it's solving something that you could literally spend all your time on, which is answering those common things you need to do again and again, right? And so I agree. Like, I think freeing yourself up, that's where you get those moments of delight where people started to think about like input in a form and what's a way that they could really like make someone buying a dog biscuit be happy, right? Or those things. And so, creativity always goes through the swing when it comes to design and frameworks where it becomes very, utility driven. And then on the other aspect is completely not utility. And there's always this little thing that happens in between where we find that sweet spot where we can still delight the user, still delight people, whether it's through performance or feedback or any of those things. So I think embracing those things to free yourself up, to spend pockets somewhere else is a constraint and also super efficient way to drive other goals that you may have.
Right. I really like this idea of the problem shifts, right? We've done some of the work already so that you don't have to think about what do the components look like or how do they behave or how do they function. They are already familiar to people, but it comes back to this idea that maybe there's a combinational aspect to creativity, and the way we put the pieces together creates new solutions, that we don't have to always invent the most basic elements. And that we can think about what is the best component to choose, what is the best order, what is the best context, what information and experience goes around that ready-made piece that makes that ready-made piece even better. Maybe an analogy is like Legos, right? You get a not even a kit, not even a Lego kit. You get like the free-form box of pieces, right? You don't have to invent the blocks, and the way that they fit together has already been designed for you. And you get that box of 1,000 little pieces of plastic, and you can make an infinite number of things from it. So you're not thinking about, how do I make a better Lego block? You're thinking about, am I going to build a castle? Am I going to build a car? Am I going to build some spaceship or something like that? And so you are able to take the pieces and put them together into a new way that has it, that combination has an experience. I think this also starts to lean in toward the relationship between creativity and innovation. And Tatiana, you said something about the role of time in this process, and how much time do we have to think about the problems? How much time do we have for exploration or transformation or combination in order to generate things? Is time a limiting factor? Is our desire for velocity a limiting factor for creativity and innovation?
I think my favorite thing to do is to question timelines, much to the chagrin of anyone who's ever had to work with me. Because, I mean, more often than not, timelines were made up. Like, everything is made up, and we can get, philosophical and existential, but timelines are made up. So my favorite question to ask is, what is driving this timeline? And for people that are pushing timelines, what pressure are you experiencing? Because that places us into a space where often time is the one constraint that I feel like we have in. You have to remember, a capitalist setting, yes, like the time value of money and all those things. Of course, we're always being driven for time, the only resource, as far as I know, none of us in this room can create, but I know several tech billionaires are trying to create time or find the fountain of youth or whatnot. But I think that time, while it can be a limiting factor, does not need to be. And I think it's the first one that I tend to question, and in favor of better acceptance criteria, because we use time as a reason to excuse having an unperformant product. We use time as a reason to make an inaccessible product. We use time as an excuse to ship a broken product. But time's not the one doing that. We can change the timeline. So I think shifting away from time as our one factor and shifting it towards something a bit more tactical and measurable, and with more justification, right? It's much easier to say, this is our finite list of acceptance criteria, 1 through 10. They need to be met before we can ship. Whereas, like, I don't know, how often have you missed timelines? I don't know, maybe it's different at much more rigid corporate environments, but I feel like time is such a whack excuse.
Time is a self-imposed constraint, right? The universe has not dictated, like the light of speed. The universe has not dictated that this product shall be done on Wednesday. Someone made that choice. And
someone with power. And so I want to interrupt you kindly with that. I think that the idea of self-imposed isn't always the case. It's usually people in power that set the timelines with very little understanding and very little context.
Right. Yeah, I should be clear. By self-imposed, I don't mean the individual. I mean the people involved, the company. It's a choice. Someone made it, but it's a choice. Yeah, Jason, you were starting to say something.
I think depending on the company. I mean, I work for an e-commerce retailer, so there are some things that we can't change in terms of time. We can't rearrange the calendar, but I think more often than not, to Tatiana's point, we get ourselves into this problem by one way or another picking the deadline before we understand the problem, before we even know if those acceptance criteria are the right acceptance criteria. I mean, that's so that the experience of small number of designers, large number of engineers, very often there's a mismatch in who gets started on what when, and it can just as easily be the designer who's not in the conversation early enough versus the engineer not being there early enough, and both of those are wrong, flat out. There's just no reason why you should start any one of these projects without having all of the right people in the room, and then talk about what are our constraints. If time is one of them, then figure that out. Understand why. If it's because there's a hard deadline around a seasonal event, sure, that's fine. But I can't tell you the number of times in working in agencies where that deadline was just something somebody had to put on a calendar, and then everybody treats it like a fire drill, and you just you never question it, when all we had to do was say, "Are you sure?" And then they would have said, "Oh, well, why?" And you give them all of these reasons why that's going to be a terrible idea, and they're like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." Honestly, I threw a dart, so don't mind me. And I think that's our knee-jerk reaction is to never question that, because we didn't see them throw the dart, so we just assume.
Stacey, you got a big chuckle there. As someone who works in a large organization where deadlines and target dates may have been decided by someone not on the team throwing a dart, how do we deal with time, and from a community sense, how do we all collectively deal with time, right? How do we make sure that all of the right people and all of the right voices are present at all of the right times?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, our area of what I focus on with employees is kind of separate from the whole product experience of, you've got your deadlines, you've got your sprints, you've got all your things. We work on really helping people push their own ideas forward, and doing that in a very compressed, so to speak, deadline at Microsoft. That's really what our team does. And so time in that sense, many people don't have a lot of it. We don't have a lot of it. And it's actually embraced. It's not to say that it shouldn't be embraced in the situations that are described before, because everything that's said is completely accurate, right? Most people don't question the time thing. But for what we're doing, we actually embrace it. And one of the things about having a compressed timeline, it's not about, crushing yourself to meet something that's doesn't matter. It's just about, we're going to do as much as we can to articulate the idea in whatever shape, form, or way. That's actually a really amazing constraint, because it requires people to be super decisive, and it requires you to have everyone at the table right from the beginning. So if you don't have a designer you can talk to right now, you can't make that decision. Forget it. So we fundamentally believe time is great in that regard, in what we're trying to achieve, which is giving employees an outlet to go explore some of their own ideas. We believe that you got to have everyone at the table right at the beginning, because then, bring them along throughout, forget it. And then the other one is that good ideas can come from anywhere and anyone. And so that's the other thing, is making sure that there's different tenures in the room, there's different whatever, and that everyone just has that moment, and that compressed moment. Because the passion and energy you get to sustain that is where you start to get some bigger ideas. Is one of the things that we've kind of noticed in that regard. It doesn't fit into the product discussion we're having here per se, but many product teams themselves are spinning up innovation moments or innovation opportunities that are very focused, very thoughtful, I guess. In many of the product teams, for example, they have their own kind of way of making sure that there's room, time to do that, and mostly to fail, right? Because when we talk about all this stuff, if you don't have time to fail, put something out there, it doesn't resonate, doesn't work, you can't iterate on it, then you're not innovating, because you're never going to be able to go back, fix it, do the next thing. And so, not only the deadline, but the ability to fail within that deadline.
Right. And just I know we're coming up on time here, but to try and summarize, time is not always a bad constraint, right? We can reframe this problem. We can think about it another way. We can say, well, let's use it as an asset, right? Let's drive forward. Let's make decisions. But I think it also points out one of the skills we mentioned at the beginning: elaboration, the ability to take an idea and to flesh it out, and to do so quickly is a skill, but to leverage time to help people do that, to not get stuck in an exploration mode, but to make a decision and then to go deep on something. So as we head into the Q&A here, because I know we probably have questions over there that people are waiting for. I do want to ask a sort of closing question for each one of you. Jason, you commented that one of the reasons why you like cycling is because it allows you to clear your head and to step away. And so for each of you, and we can do round robin here, what do you do for play? And how does play become part of your creative processes, your innovative processes? And Tatiana, we'll start with you. How do you play, and what's the role of play in creativity for you?
I think it's just keeping an open mind and reminding myself to be simultaneously humble, but also to recognize when I'm presenting something with some insecurity and naming that and making that okay.
Right. All right. Stacey, play. How do you play, and the role of play in creativity?
I make up lyrics, alternative lyrics to songs. Every single day. That's what I do. And I treat it like an exercise. If you don't practice it, it's not going to happen.
Is it something that you do with like great intensity and focus, where you sit down for time and you write the lyrics, or are you like an impromptu artist and you are just in the moment making them up as the song is playing?
Yeah, the song is playing. Yep.
That is such an unbelievable skill. I don't know how y'all probably remember Whose Line Is It Anyway, the show on television. And they have the segment where the impromptu artists are told sing in the style of about, and then they pick some completely random thing, like a witch flying on a plunger in the style of bluegrass, and then they do it, and it's like, wow. Okay, Jason, and for you, before we take our Q&A, what's the role of play, and how does play involve in your creativity?
A couple things. Unfortunately, one, we've actually blown through all of our time, and we're actually pretty much out. I'm watching Matthew have a little bit of a meltdown in the corner here, so I want to save the rest of his hair, but it's the bike for me is so important. The dog walks in the morning, like those are the ways where I can sort of disengage and let my brain do its thing, let my body do something else, and it really helps me like reconnect those two things. Gosh, I hate to do this, but man, this was so much fun. Dave, thank you so much for pulling us together.